Today, I want to share with you, our topic today is, do we look elsewhere? Do we look elsewhere? You know, sometimes you can find yourself in a very serious situation. And sometimes you already know that my help comes from this source. But it can be so serious that you can begin to ask yourself, do I go somewhere else? You know, we have heard of those Christians who have, in Africa, those Christians who have, sometimes things get so bad that you decide to go to the African magic, the magicians. Do we look elsewhere? And I want us to go through the scripture, and we will be looking at the story of John the Baptist. Now, John was born of Zechariah. Now, Zechariah was a priest. And this priest was in the temple. Actually, he was in the temple burning incense. And the multitude of the people were outside praying. And then the angel Gabriel appeared to him and tells him something. And that one we see from the book of Luke chapter 1 verse 13. The book of Luke chapter 1 verse 13. The angel Gabriel tells Zechariah that, Zechariah, your prayer has been answered. Your wife Elizabeth shall conceive and bear you a son, and you shall name him John. And this Gabriel went ahead even to tell Zechariah what kind of person this John would be. He went ahead to tell even the type of food that he will eat. And I want you to know that Zechariah was too old. Too old. Zechariah and Elizabeth, they were too old to give birth. Very old indeed. And my friends, I want to ask you, when this angel comes to talk to Zechariah and tells him that, Zechariah, your prayer has been heard, was this really the prayer of Zechariah at this particular time? Was it really his prayer? Because I know from the bottom of my heart that Zechariah had given up. He had given up ever giving birth again. He didn't know that at one time he will have a child of his own. Was this really his prayer at this time? Both of them, Zechariah and Elizabeth, were so much advanced in age that they had lost hope of bearing children. Now, you know, when I went through this, there's some lessons that I learned here. That God answers our prayers according to our needs and also to fulfill his mission. You know, sometimes when we sit around and people ask, does God answer prayers? You know, I get very funny answers. Sometimes people say, he says no, he says wait, he says yes. No. I believe God answers our prayers according to our needs and also to fulfill his mission. Because at this particular time, this could not have been the prayer of Zechariah. Zechariah had resigned from ever giving birth. Now there's a second lesson that we can learn from this. That the birth of John the Baptist, like that of Isaac, teach us some lesson here. that with God, everything is possible. Things may be impossible with man, but with God, all is possible. There are so many people who had been declared barren, like Hannah, like Sarah, like Rachel. You know, all these people had been declared barren. But they all had children because of God. With God, all is possible. Friends, I want to tell you one thing. That when the angel Gabriel told Zechariah that your wife Elizabeth will conceive and bear a child, Zechariah doubted and he did not believe it. He doubted it. He doubted. He did not believe it. And I think he was right. You know, he doubted. He did not believe it. Now, what does the book of Luke chapter 1 and verse 20 tell us? That because he doubted, because he did not believe it, he was going to be silent and not to speak. You know, Zechariah was a priest. He was supposed to believe God and relay to people the messages from God. But you know, Zechariah doubted. And he didn't believe this. And this doubt led to him becoming dumb. Now, what lesson does this teach us? This lesson teaches us that those who believe should speak. Friends, if you believe, speak up. Preach the good news. Go out and tell Jesus about the love of God. Tell everybody the love of Jesus. Those who believe must speak. But those who don't believe, those who doubt, should keep quiet. These two lessons we learn. Those who doubt should keep quiet because they can mislead. But you know, in a real life situation, actually it is the reverse which normally happens in churches. Those who don't study the Bible or casually go through it are those who speak loudest. Yeah. You know, those who don't believe, those who you get one verse and you go along everywhere you shout loudest. But those who diligently study the word are quiet. They keep it to themselves. You know, there's a time we passed here with my wife and I found my pastor friend sitting alone in this office. And I said, hey, how do you feel? They said, this place is very quiet. Pastor, get out and talk. Because you have believed. Those who believe should speak. But those, you know, every time that you walk around, because I normally see people, if you walk through Main Street on Sunday, you find people, you know, with flyers, come and worship with us. There's a time that we went to a gas station and then another lady told us, do you know that Jesus loves you? You know, casually like that. But for us who study the word, for us who know it, friends, we always keep quiet. Let us go out and tell the word. Let us go out and preach it. Amen. So that the world may hear that this Jesus is really coming soon. Now, Elizabeth actually became pregnant. And John was born. Now, in fulfillment of the prophecy, John began to preach. And there was a very unique way that John was preaching. John preached a plain truth. You know, the preaching of John the Baptist was so strong that people thought that he was the Messiah. If you read Matthew chapter 3 and verse 11, people thought that John was actually the Messiah. And even Ellen White writes that if he had said that he was the Messiah, people would have believed him. But John himself said, no, I'm not. Somebody is coming behind me, stronger than me. But you know, so many people were thinking that this could be the Messiah. Friends, I want to tell you that the Lord himself knows that some of us cannot be trusted with authority. When we see a big crowd, we begin to think that we are popular. You know, now I have a big crowd, I can now start my church. Yeah? And yet, if you read like Ephesians chapter 4 verse 11, you know, Jesus, we have been given specific roles. Some are evangelists, some are prophets, some are teachers. But you know, immediately we see a crowd, we think we are popular. God cannot entrust some of us with authority. John was so popular that some people believed that this was the Messiah. And I tell you, John preached regardless of who was in the congregation. You know, sometimes we people who sometimes stand here to preach, sometimes we begin to preach and then somebody steps in, and then you get a little bit confused. Yeah, I remember a time that I was in school with my students. Then we called a preacher, and he had just started preaching. We was almost beginning to preach. Then another professor, Professor Tinga, just walked in and said, today I want to fellowship with students. Then this guy says, hey, Professor Isaiah, I tell you, everybody, even the students, were wondering where the sermon had gone to. You see? I tell you, John preached regardless of who was in the congregation. Because I remember one day, he rebuked Herod, because Herod had taken Herodias, who was his brother Philip's wife. You know, he wanted to kill John. Herod had wanted to kill John, but you know, he feared the people. Herod feared the people because people considered John a prophet. So Herod decided to put John in prison. So John was put in prison by Herod. And while John was in prison, I want to tell you, friends, that John suffers. The suffering was too much for John. John suffered so much that, you know, he heard that somebody had come. Then he sent two of his disciples to Jesus with a question. And that is our scripture reading. In Matthew chapter 11 and verse 3, John sent 2 of his disciples to Jesus. And he asked them to ask him that, are you the one who is to come? Or should we look for another? Are you the one who is to come? Or should we look for another? Friends, I tell you, the suffering was so severe that John doubted that Jesus had come. And you know, such kind of suffering can befall us. Sometimes we can find ourselves in such a situation that we can suffer so much and begin to doubt whether God really exists. You know, okay, this is my personal story. You know, my father died in 1975. And you know, that same year, 3 of them died. One of my uncles killed his brother in April 1975. Then the one that my father follows, who was a church elder, died in July. Then my own father died in November 28, 1975. So you know, when people were crying, what I could hear people saying, why us? Why us? What is happening? You know, sometimes you tend to feel that God has left you, that God doesn't exist. Friends, I want to share with you some verses just to show you how John knew Jesus. And yet, John could ask, are you the one who is to come? Or should we look for another? Now, in Luke chapter 1 and verse 41, in Luke chapter 1 and verse 41, you know, John, he leapt in the womb of pregnant Mary. John knew Jesus even before he was born. Because when Mary met Elizabeth, John was so happy. Yeah, I've met the Messiah. In John chapter 1 and verse 28, John identified Jesus among the crowd. You know, John was baptizing and people were coming. Then when he spotted Jesus, he says, behold the Lamb of God that takes away what? The sin of the world. He identified Jesus in the crowd. And then it is this same John who got hold of Jesus and baptized Jesus by immersion, dipped Jesus in water and raised him up. And as Jesus came from the water, John himself saw the Spirit of God fall on Jesus like a dove. And John heard the voice of God declaring that this is my beloved Son. John heard it. John heard it. John heard God declaring that this is the Christ. And yet, while he's in prison, John asks, go to that man and ask him, are you the one who is to come, or should we wait for another? Friends, I tell you, sometimes suffering can be too much on us that we can begin to doubt whether God really exists. Now, with all these evidences, friends, John still doubted. After knowing Jesus, even before Jesus was born, after seeing Jesus from the crowd, after baptizing and handling Jesus, John would still doubt and send people to ask the crowd that, are you the one who is to come, or should we look for another? Now, if the sufferings would make him doubt, friends, I want to ask you one question. Where does this leave me and you? If John himself, who knew Jesus that much, would doubt, where does this leave me and you? People who sometimes we don't even pray, sometimes in our houses, the only prayer may be the prayer for food. God bless this food before we take it, amen. Where does it leave me and you? If John himself would doubt, what should actually be the measure of our faith? What should be the measure of our faith? You know, John stood for truth. And because of the truth, he finally died. Our faith must be so strong, a faith that can lead to death. A faith that can stand the dangers that lead to death. I know you know the way John died. After Salome had danced, then Herodias said, go and bring his head. So John was killed. Friends, I want to tell you one thing. That when you stand for truth, there are many things that sometimes you can lose. You can lose your job. You can lose your scholarship. You can lose your husband. You can lose your wife when you stand for truth. But I want to tell you that at the end of the day, you will be pronounced victorious. And Paul tells us in Romans chapter 8 and verse 28, that all things work together for good to them that do what? That love the Lord. Whether you lose your job, all things. Whether you lose your scholarship, all things. Whether you lose your wife, all things. Whether you lose your husband, all things work together for good to them that love the Lord. Now, a story is told of, there was a missionary, somebody who was going on a voyage. He was in the sea, and then deep down in the seas, his boat capsized. Then he decided to, he was swimming, and he went to the nearby island. Now, when he reached there was nothing that he could do. He would just raise his hand for any help to come, and there was no help coming by. You know, he was in deep distress, because here he was. It is growing cold, nothing to eat, and the boat is there lost in the sea, and is there alone. Then he decided to build a ramshackle, a small structure where he could spend the night. So he built a small hut with the grasses and the trees that he could find around. Then something very funny happened, that after building this, he spent the night there, then the following day, this hut caught fire and burnt down. I don't know, this is a man of God. Remember, we are talking about Romans 8 and verse 28, that all things, all. You know, the hut that he had built burnt down. And he was saying, what kind of suffering is this? Why would I suffer this way? Then, he saw another boat coming by. He saw another boat coming by. Up to that place. Then when those people reached where he was, then he asked them, how did you know that I was here? How did you know that I was here? They told him that we saw your smoke signal. You know, as the house was burning, we would see that fire. So we saw that fire. Friends, all things, inasmuch as the house was burning, it was sending a signal for hell. All things, that we saw your smoke signal. All things work together for good to them that love the Lord. Amen. And that's where, you know, sometimes when I'm at home, I do a lot of singing. I want to sing a song. Amen. For those of you who know this Linda Randall, this lady who sings with Bill Gaither. Linda Randall says life is easy. Life is easy when you are up on the mountain and you've got peace of mind like you've never known. But things change when you are down in the valley. Don't lose faith, for you're never alone. For the God of the mountain is the God of the valley. When things go wrong, He makes them right. And the God of the good times is still God in the bad times. The God of the day is still God in the night. The God of the day is still God in the night. May God bless you. Amen.